so I will immediately disappear. After introducing you, Lydia, who will introduce more deeply Professor Perullo, but I thank him again to be here with us. I'm very proud to have this event this evening, and I'm very thankful because he's here with us after a tremendous landing in Schiphol, because it was not a good day to fly. But we can consider it a new aesthetic experience, an extreme experience, yes. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Ik zal het in het Nederlands doen, want we zijn natuurlijk hier in Amsterdam bij het Italiaanse Instituut van Cultura. En ik ben vanavond bijzonder blij dat jullie hier zijn en ik ben echt heel erg blij dat onze vriend Nicola hier is, professor Nicola Perullo. En dat hij mijn uitnodiging heeft geaccepteerd om hier te zijn om over een bijzonder thema te spreken die voor mij heel erg belangrijk is, persoonlijk, maar ook voor mijn beroep. Mijn naam is Lydia Bernabei en ik ben voedingscoach, dus jullie begrijpen alvast de link met Nicola, maar dat is niet de enige. Ik ben voedingscoach en ik organiseer met mijn bedrijf Sole Luna welzijnreizen en themareizen naar Italië. En evenementen hier in Nederland om mensen te leren om hun ritme te vertragen, om beter van het leven te kunnen genieten. En daar speelt zeker eten, koken, voeding, food een belangrijke rol in. Maar dan vraag ik jullie, voor wie niet eigenlijk? Nou, dan gaan we direct richting een filosofische onderwerp, want eten, koken en alle activiteiten die daar te maken hebben, zijn deel van ons bestaan sinds de mens bestaat. Het is eigenlijk een daadwerkelijke dimensie van het bestaan van de mens. Dus van de zomer, toen ik Nicola ontmoette in dat stukje van het onontdekte Toscane, waar wij nu ook onze reis organiseren en waar wij graag ook voor ons eigen plezier gaan, kreeg ik van hem een paar boeken als cadeau. En één is deze en dan deze ook. En ik heb ze natuurlijk beide gelezen. En ik moet eigenlijk zeggen dat nooit had ik zo diep de smaak van food en van de ingrediënten geproefd. Nou, voor mij is het nog duidelijker geworden dat voor eten en koken en als wij over ingrediënten hebben we niet alleen maar over de ingrediënten zelfs, maar over de mooie ideeën die daaraan gelinkt zijn. En nou, het is natuurlijk nu heel erg voor het hand en heel erg makkelijk en vanzelfsprekend dat wij over filosofie gaan praten met Nicola hier. Maar ik zou zeggen, open your mouth to talk with him, but also your mind. En laat je inspireren en ga vooral het gesprek aan met Nicola. Dit wel. Heel erg.
So, thank you. Do I need to use this or not? Yes?
Depends if you speak in it.
I didn't understand a word of what Lydia said, so I don't know what she said.
A lot of very bad things about you, of course.
So thank you very much for this very kind invitation from the Istituto Italiano di Cultura and from Lydia and Sole Luna. I love Amsterdam. I came here quite often in the last 20 years, 25 years, so it's always a pleasure to be here for me. And this is a very beautiful building, so I'm proud to be here tonight. I just want to make a very, it's late, it's Friday night, so I don't want to bore you with too analytical arguments, philosophical arguments about food, about art and taste. I would like to make a quick and I hope interesting introduction to some topics and to give you some suggestions. Hopefully we can discuss something later on if you are interested. As Lydia and Lucia told, I am a philosopher and professor of aesthetics. So I don't want to make it too long, this story, but between philosophy, aesthetics and food, there always have been quarrels and problems. It's not it's not immediate to make this connection. It's not immediate. But to put it very simply, without food there is no life, and without life there is no thought, and there is not philosophy. So it's a very simple argumentation, very, very simple argumentation, but it's a very strong argument. And some philosophers, like in the past, Feuerbach, the man is what he hits, or other kinds of assessments, realize very well and state very well this truth. So the story is quite long, it's quite complicated. Tonight I just want, but I don't want to talk in general about this. I want to focus on some relationship that we can find today between food, cuisine and art. I dedicate some works, some books to this topic in the last years, stemming from the fact, very well known, very, very common today, that you know, the food discourse, the food narrative today is pervasive, is overwhelming, it's everywhere, mass media, television, newspapers, everywhere there is food on TV and on every other medium. This increasing interest in food is due to many different factors. One of the factors that I would like to point it out tonight is the role of the chef, of the cook in our society today. To be a chef, if you mind that, has become very fascinating and very popular. Nowadays, becoming a chef, becoming someone who cooks professionally, has become something serious and something that has an important role in society, even if your background is from a cultivated family or high society. And it was very different from 20 years ago. If a boy or a girl 20 years ago was about to tell his parents, I'm going to be a chef, I want to cook, and the family maybe is a good family, is a family from the bourgeois context, they wouldn't be very happy, because till 20 years ago to become a chef was something that just you could do if you didn't have any better things to do. Today, in the mediatization age, in our society of images, of mediatized world, chefs, as you know, are like pop stars or rock stars. They are becoming more and more famous, opinion leaders, and powerful. So this changed a lot, also from this perspective. I would say that this has a lot to do with the digital age and the web age we are living and in which we are already, and this is our future. So the mediatization of the narrative, of the world in which we live has a lot to do with cooking, with the importance of cooking and the role of the chef. Why? Because we can, as what we eat, as someone said before, maybe Lydia, if I understood something of the speech, if what we eat is something that we have to experience directly, we cannot surrogate our experience of eating with someone that tells us what she eats. It's different eating from being told of what someone eats. Try not to eat and try just to listen what other people ate, and you will not feed yourself. Or you will not feed yourself in the same sense, and it's not enough for you. You will feed something, maybe, in your mind. You will nourish your soul, but it's not enough. We need to be fed to live physically. But it is true at the same time that in this age of mediated object, of images, of pictures, of television, or web, we can discuss of food and cuisine even if we didn't experience all the things we discuss about. There are a lot of famous chefs or famous plates or menus that we didn't try, we haven't tried, but we learn by books, by television, by internet. So the famous, very famous, the most famous chef in the world of the last 50 years, which is the Catalan Ferran Adrià. I don't know if you ever heard about him. Ferran Adrià is the most influential chef in the last 40-50 years in the world. Books, movies, and degrees and theses dedicated to him. Maybe you have heard about him, but maybe you have some opinion about him, even if you never tried his cuisine. Maybe you can criticize his cuisine just by looking or just learning what he did in the past. So, this is why I told that this interest is due also to this argument, to these reasons. So why art? Why art? The connection between food and art is at the same time very ancient and very modern. The philosopher Plato, this book is titled "Can Cuisine Be Art?" And this is a question that the ancient philosopher Plato posed in the 5th century before Christ, and he answered no. So it's a very ancient question, but the possibility to consider cuisine as art and chef as artist is very modern. Started, well, for the first time in the 18th century, when the restaurants as public spaces were invented. In Europe, in our Western society, restaurants were invented in the 18th century. As like museum, places in which you pay the ticket, you go to have something back that is supposed to give you pleasure, to give you enjoyment. You pay a service, not just to be fed, but to prove emotions or to have some enjoyment. And this is parallel to the invention of the museums. In the same age, museums and the public spaces and restaurants and public spaces were invented in Europe. In this period, the idea for the chef to be considered as someone who has the freedom to create something on his own style, raised for the first time. I'm not saying that before this period there was not the technique, there was not good chefs, good cook, but to be good before that period meant to be good, to make things in the proper way, as a good to have a good technique, so to make or make again what was already made in the past according to some rules. From the 18th century, like if someone of you is expert in the history of art, something similar happened in the history of art a couple of centuries before. From the 18th century, in the history of cuisine, raised the idea that a chef is someone that can invent, can create something new. New with respect to the past, to the ancestors, the fathers. So the idea of cuisine as art raised from with our modernity, and then looms large in the 19th century, and of course now in the 20th century. Expression like nouvelle cuisine, they tell exactly that. I want to be new with respect to something that is old, that is to the past. So the idea of freedom, of creativity, of imagination are connected to a new concept of art as something creative, as something that has to do with this idea of freedom. So what about the technique? What about the savoir-faire? What about the skills? In the modern age, and I mentioned Ferradria before, not just by chance, I didn't mention by chance. Ferradria was the most, the strongest model for this idea of creating, breaking the rules, making something new, like in architecture, like in other arts. And the idea of normal cuisine, traditional cooking, became, I wouldn't say less important, but something different from art. Having to do more with artisanship, with craftsmanship. Well, my idea is that this ideology is false. This ideology is a mistake. I think that cuisine can be art, if it is an art, even if we take seriously the idea of art as good technique, savoir-faire, and this means also domestic dimension, traditional dimension, putting things, settling things well prepared in order to make other people enjoy, and proving good emotion and well-being. This is a story that ran in the last 50, 60 years especially, when the idea of archive, of the digitalization, of photography, of books, you know, for example, I don't know if you, there is a very strong trend today of the so-called table books dedicated to cuisine and food. Table books are not recipe books, are books that you put on the table and you just look like a catalog of art. Just for the pictures, just for reading about the history of the recipes or the chefs. So this has to do a lot with this. I would distinguish three moments in this recent history. The 18th century is the beginning, as I told you, but it's a long story. I'm not going to tell you about that. In the recent very recent history, in the last 50, 60 years, I would distinguish three peculiar moments of this topic. In the 70s of the last century, of the 20th century, French cuisine was still the most important in the world for high cuisine, for creative and artistic cuisine. And the expression nouvelle cuisine was famous in the 70s and the 80s about that. But the chef in this model of nouvelle cuisine, Paul Bocuse and other people, was considered as a very, very good and skilled artisan. Someone who is tremendously good in doing things, in working with hands, in working with the body and the technique to realize good dishes, good plates and good menus. The second moment is the Catalan Revolution, Ferran Adrià and Spanish Revolution in the late 80s and 90s, 20-25 years ago, in which the idea was breaking the rules, making something new, forget about the past, and try to make aesthetic experience also in the visual sense. Texture, temperatures, changing of states from solid to liquid, from liquid to vaporous state, and all this transformation, joking with food, expanding the boundaries of food, and making art with food in the tradition, in the canonized sense of art, making experience, making performative experience through food that are similar to the experience with art. It's a niche. Of course, I'm talking about a niche, but this niche became very trendy and very popular and very important for the increasingly character of the chef that I will mention at the beginning. Many people became fascinated by the role of the chef and the cook in cuisine because they say, oh, it's a creative work. I can express myself by cooking. It's not just making something always the same. I'm not just a slave in the kitchen. I can express myself, I can be free, and I can give a chance to my creativity. So this was a very important period. The third period has to do with something that occurred in the last 10 years especially, and also has to do with someone that concerned you closely because has to do with a trend developed in the northern country of Europe, the so-called New Nordic cuisine. New Nordic cuisine that was developed especially in Denmark and Scandinavia and in the northern Europe, also in Holland, is important because it put for the first time another concept, the concept of freedom, creativity, imagination that I mentioned before. Also the concept of responsibility and the idea of tradition and sense of place that a chef has to considerate in order to make very good food. This idea of using local products, local tradition, was not in the genetics of the higher cuisine until that. The creative chef traditionally was someone that could utilize whatever he found without limits. I think that this is good. I think that this is very important, even if it comes from Japan, and I can use it here. I don't mind it, because I have no limit for my creativity. In the last 10 years, the idea of some Nordic chefs and also people all around the world was more about an idea of eco-gastronomy or sustainability, or being sensitive to the environment, to the problems of local and traditional food. So responsibility became, and ethics became very, very important and a key word. So the idea was connected ethics and aesthetics at the same time. Aesthetics, because I cook very good food with strong skills, very high technique, very good vision about taste, but I want also to utilize products, recipes, and creating network in the local economy in order to be also a social responsible figure. Chef as someone that has an importance also from a social point of view. So this has to do with art, because this also goes parallel with the evolution of the concept of art. From just something frivolous, something that is with no connection to responsibility and ethics, with the concept that are today related to environmental art, public art, social engagement. So this is something that runs parallel also in the world of cuisine. But this last point about responsibility, about tradition, about sense of place, gave rise also to another very important feature. The filling the gap between the professional and the very elitistic dimension of cooking and cuisine, like restaurant, fine dining, and the domestic space of cooking. Because if I want to utilize, even if I have a restaurant, in a very important restaurant, in a Michelin star restaurant, I want to utilize local food, I want to be responsible toward the environment and toward the communities in which I live. The distance between what I do and what normal people do in a domestic space or in a normal cafeteria or osteria became smaller and smaller. In Italy, we have a word, osteria. Osteria is a word that till 20 years ago was considered to be a bad word. An osteria was a place in which you eat a lot of food, but bad, very cheap, and without any care. Just to, you went there just to get drunk, to eat a lot. So to go in an osteria was not a very fancy expression. Today, the most important restaurant in Italy, is one of the most important in the world, is called Osteria Francescana. And the idea of osteria changed completely following these arguments that I just quickly scratch you. Osteria is a place in which you are respectful for the ingredients. You are respectful for the environment. You are the vision of the food you cook that is 0 miles or ecologically compatible, or sustainable, something like this. So the idea of osteria today is not so far from the idea of fine dining, at least not in abstract. It depends on how you cook. It depends on the care and the dexterity and the ability and the vision you have. But it's not a difference in the kind of ingredients and the idea that you have in mind. So these are some changes that occur in the last 20, 30 years, and this is why I find interesting to talk about cuisine and art and to make parallel between food and art. Without mention the importance of the connection between art and gender from this point of view, because everything I said, if you think of the hierarchization between higher cuisine and domestic cuisine, this prejudice is parallel to the hierarchization between male and female in artistic expression and in all the important role in society. Cuisine in the 18th century became art precisely because went out of the domestic dimension, and the male chefs opened their restaurant. They have their background and their skill by some masters outside. They have time to dedicate to that, and they became, like in all the other arts, masters. And women stay at home in the kitchen to cook in the domestic dimension, and this was not considered art, of course. And the same happened in music. If you lullaby are not considered art, to be considered art, you have to go to the conservatory, to the musical institute, and to learn with some other masters, and then you. So this idea, the fact that this food is very nice as an example of this, because food is unescapable. Even the highest and most famous chef in the world must eat for yourself and for his family, and someone cooked for him when he was a child, when he was very, very young. So you cannot in food totally divide the professional dimension from your biographic and personal dimension. There are a lot of people that are good in cinema, in music, or in literature, and other people that they never did it, that they never been in a museum, they never read a book, but there are not people that never ate or cooked or see someone cooking for him or for her. This is the difference between food and other objects. So I think that thinking about these things in art and aesthetics through food is interesting, not just for food and cuisine, but is interesting also for these other expressions like art and culture, because you can see the differences and the importance of food, and you can also, like the question of gender that I mentioned very quickly, and I just give you some suggestions, so I'm not going too deep into the explanation of what I say. If you want to ask me clarification about every single point, I will be very happy to give, but just to give you a general idea of what I did in these books. So the question of gender is important, because if you start to think art as in a huger sense, something that is not just creativity as making something original, but has to do also with the hands, with the work, with the skills, with practical skills, like in the ancient sense, very ancient sense of art. If you start to think about the social and ethical responsibility you have toward other people, these things breaks the hierarchization between male and female as gender, of course, not as sex. I'm talking about cultural gender. I'm not talking about biological sex. I don't want to be misunderstood about this. I don't say that there are differences between male and female in sex. I say that there are socially and culturally constructed difference in history because of gender. So as a gender role, woman's place was in the kitchen normally, with some exceptions. So if you wanted to escape from this model, you have to reverse the hierarchization and to act or to try to be like a man in the same field, which is of course very important and very possible, but at the same time I would like to have more men that cook at home like the women, and not just women that want to cook like the men in the restaurant. This is the importance to balance, no? So this is another, for me, important topic about cooking and art. So what I think is that we should try through food to design an idea, a productive idea of art as art of everyday life, art as a powerful tool to put ourselves into question in practical everyday life. And food is a very important tool because we can escape this. So choosing food, choosing the food that we want to eat according to our style, to our preferences, to our well-being, and then making this food properly, and then eating this food properly, so cultivate also the arts of eating. All these processes from the raw material, from the field, so from choosing, from the farmers, from the fishermen, to the table, to the eating, to the act of consuming, can be part of our art of everyday life. And it's a very interesting and important tool that we have at our disposal, because it's everywhere. We cannot escape food. So as we have to eat, we can try to eat and to consume food, to think of food with our proper style and artistic style. We can be, as some artists say, Joseph Beuys, a very famous contemporary German artist, say, every human being can be an artist when aesthetics meets him in his life, her in his life. And we have, with food, the possibility to meet aesthetics every day, so we can be artists of our life in every day through food. This is my final thesis. I talk, of course, about fine dining, very famous chef, very important chef, and I don't say that this is not important. They are great, they are smart, they are avant-garde, and they give impulses to people, to make people think about the importance of food, of course. And they are in the TV, they are in the internet, they are very important, they have a very important role. But we cannot just think about the importance of food through them and just limiting the idea to them. It's it will be very, very, very poor, because food is something that it's much more important, much bigger than this dimension of fine dining and restaurants. So we should start to think about food in the domestic dimension at home, and this part is as much important as the professional one, even from the perspective of art. So this is something that I try to say in this book, which is now just in Italian. We are translating in English. Maybe next year or in 2 years will be released also in English. And this is a collection of essays of a conference that we gave last year in the university in which I teach. which is a University of Gastronomic Science, and it is an institution in which it's not a philosophical university, it's a university of many different disciplines, from botany to chemistry to history to nutrition to semiotics to philosophy to art, all focus on food, in which students became food experts and gastronomes from this cultural point of view. And we gave a conference last year about the connection between food, aesthetics, and art. So now I'm finishing anyway. In this book, which is also an Italian edition, there are some interesting essays by different scholars, also about the relationship between food and photography, food and cinema, food and literature, food and design, many different arts with which food can be compared. And it's also a very important and huge topic. I didn't discuss about it tonight because of time, because I cannot discuss about many things, but of course there is huge literature about connection between food and movies, photography and cinema and poems, of course paintings. There is a huge tradition of still life and games, paintings. Food is tremendously important even from this point of view. Okay, so I stop here, and if you have questions or observations, please. Thank you very much. Thank you. The question is very interesting and complicated. It's very important, the focus, the idea of the critic today, because I think, to put it very shortly, I think that food is precisely the field in which you can see very clearly how the concept of authority and the critic, that is a modern concept that we heritage from the modernity, from the 17th and 18th century, art critics and literary critics and so on. Food is a very strong example of how this today is going to be breaking down, or at least to be transformed, because everyone eats. And the fact that only the expert can evaluate food goes against this very simple fact that I am an ignorant, but I can have the same experience of eating as you. So who are you to tell me what is good and what is bad? I've been gastronomic critics for 20 years, so I'm not denying the role of gastronomic critics. I'm saying that we have to demystifying also this, because of the very nature of food. Even the most ignorant has a background. as someone that fed her or him. Even if I'm not against, of course, cultivation. I'm totally for cultivation. It's all what I did in my work is about cultivation of taste. But at the same time, we have to be aware that food is not like photography or literature or cinema. It's different. It's quite different because you may never been in a cinema. You may never read a book, but you have been eaten, like me. Even with a different vision and with a different awareness or consciousness. So it's a dialectics between the ignorance and cultivation. Food is always a dialectics between between the vulgar side and the cultivated side. And you can see it from these algorithms that today are very important. For example, take TripAdvisor, the most important guide today in the world for restaurants. TripAdvisor is made by statistics that put together the evaluation of the expert with the evaluation of ordinaries. Anybody can evaluate. And from these statistics, the ranking comes out. It is telling. I'm not saying that is right or that is wrong. It is very telling. And if you compare this trend, for example, with what's happening in wine, wine is different. The word of criticism in wine is still much stronger than in food and restaurants, because there are a lot of people that living without drinking wine, and you choose to drink wine when you are 18 or 20, and drinking wine, it's a sign of your identity that you choose at a certain point of your life to cultivate and to have. So if I'm not expert of wine, I don't pretend. If I'm not interested in wine, I'm not pretend that I can say something in wine. And so the role of authority is much more important. But in food, things are not going exactly in the same way. Judging food is not from a perceptual point of view, from the psychology of perception. Judging food is never judging all food on itself as a list of ingredients. When you judge a food, the judgment on the evaluation is always mediated and influenced by other factors that are environment, background, memories, and other senses, of course, like the sight, like the auditory clues, everything is multisensory perception, plus the extrasensorial factors like background, memories, culture, community, the space and the time in which you try food. But this is normal. This is why it's so difficult to be. The myth of objectiveness in judging food and judging quality is, I find it is very naive. There is no objectiveness in judging food, in judging, especially when we judge a meal or when we, and there are different situations. If you go to a restaurant in which you spend 200 euros, you have certain expectation, and your perception is focused on certain features, psychological. If you go to have dinner by some friends that cook for you for your birthday, even if they are not great chefs, you will be focused on other features that make the food, your food appreciation. in a different way. So food and taste is a very flexible device. You can use it differently if you are an intelligent person, according to different situations. And it is always like that. We don't eat food in just one way. We eat food in many different ways, and we evaluate food in many different ways. What I say before is that I think that the idea of I am the expert, I am the only one that can say what is good or what is bad in food is meaningless, even from a theoric point of view, even if, of course, as a matter of fact, because food is too strong. It's the most common and vital experience we have in life, the basic experience. Like together with breathing, breathing and nourishing. It's much more important than sex, than everything else. We can live without love, but we cannot live without oxygen and without putting some substances from the outside inside our body. Now you are right, but I think that we should find a compromise. We should find a compromise. I think that cooking can be a multitasking art. You don't need to stay in the kitchen all day long thinking about food, spending hours and hours. This is not true, believe me, even in the Italian culture anymore, unless for a very few people in very few places. If you go in a big city in Italy, it's the same as in Holland today. There are not big difference from this point of view. If you go to Milan, believe me, it's not very different from Amsterdam. If you go in a very small village in the south of Italy, you can find still people that, because, of course, the heritage and the background is different. You are right from this point of view. The question, the point is that we should, in my opinion, we should stop thinking about art as something that we have to do only in a professional way. Because there is this joke between a man and a woman that making pasta. The man takes the bowl, put the water, open the gas, and stay here and watch the water boiling. Stay here till the water is not boiling. Look the water, and when the water is boiling, put the pasta inside. The woman take the water, put the water in the bowl, put it in the gas, goes and makes 200 things in the same time. And then see when the water is boiling, goes put the pasta and then goes to make other things. And this doesn't mean that the pasta will be bad, will be worse. This is what we should have. That we can be good in making food, and we can be skillful and having skillful perception, even if we are in a different situation. If we are in different, we shouldn't have the alibi to think that I have no time, so I cannot spend 5 hours today in cooking. So you can be an artist, I think, this is my opinion, even if you spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but in a good way. There is a very famous English chef, Jamie Oliver, that became a millionaire with books like 30 minutes cooking. 15 minutes was not so successful because we realized that 15 minutes was not enough. 30 minutes is the right time. So 30 minutes. You know, when there are some trend, of course, there is always this kind of phenomenon. You can, yes, this is the marketing side of the story. It's always like this. Marketing, but art and marketing are always together. I didn't say, I'm not glorifying this. All these things that, of course, they bring with them a lot of marketing, of advertising, of making business. But, you know, food is also business. Art is, who is expert of art? Art is business and market. So it is true what you said. You are right. But I think it's something unescapable, unless we go back to just to the houses and we don't sell anything. So if we stop selling, we are going to be different.
Thank you, Professor. We can have a glass of wine together.